things over to Darren Humphreys of Travel Sommelier. He's going to walk us through a presentation. We'll try to do this a little bit conversationally. So again, use the chat feature to add in any questions. And then at the end, we'll open it up for, you can ask your questions live if you haven't gotten them answered in the meantime. Sound good? You can give me a thumbs up. All right, I got thumbs up. So hopefully everybody's got themselves on mute. A couple of people still not. So Darren, I'm going to turn things over to you. Thank you for spending your Cinco de Mayo with us.
Thank you very much, Paula. Before I begin, let me say you're hired as my official PR person. You know, forget about your day job. You're now officially my marketing guru. Great introduction. Thank you very, very much. And good evening, everybody. Thanks for the honor of allowing me to talk about all things travel. It's been a long time. I've been in my foxhole for about 1.5 years. Now they've let me out, and I can eventually talk about what I love. I put together a little presentation this evening. Before we embark on it, as Paula rightly pointed out, it's very conversational. You know, this is not any form of lecture about how travel is. It's in large part based on my experience of having been at the coalface for the last 1.5 years, having just returned from a long-haul international trip a few days ago, and having my finger very much on the pulse of what I see the landscape being in the next, 3 to 6 to 9 months, the short to intermediate term. I would encourage you, just as Paula did, please to feel free to ask questions along the way. You can pop them into the chat box. They will let me know what they are. But of course, should you not wish to interrupt my flow, because when I get going, I get going, we can talk a little bit at the end. Certainly set aside some time for questions. So here we go. We title it very succinctly, Global Tourism. Let's take a look at the status of it and travel for 2021 and through to 2022 as we emerge from the pandemic here. To set the scene, I thought I'd talk a little bit about Travel Sommelier for 30 seconds to a minute, just to give you an idea of me and to gender some credibility. Well, I guess that photo doesn't gender much credibility because it makes me look as though I'm clueless, which I'm not actually. Quite the opposite. I like to think I've included this photo because what it does is underpin our USP. We have tangible first-hand knowledge of everything that we put into our portfolios, whether it be experienced providers, destinations more broadly, accommodations, safari lodges, you name it. If I haven't touched it, smelt it, felt it, eaten it, and touched it, if I don't know the owners and the management and logistics, it doesn't make it into our portfolio. And that for us is a very powerful selling point. So this is me in situ experiencing things so we can determine are they a fit or not for our customer base. So what you've just seen, that's work for me. I hate to break the news to you, but that's me hard at work. So we are based just south of Boston, as Paula rightly pointed out. I'm calling you from not so sunny Duxbury, overlooking the bay. At this juncture, I am South African, and my roots and the roots of the company are very much set on the African continent. But we're a decade old now, or we did turn a decade old just 2 weeks ago. And in the time from inception to now, we've garnered a global footprint for what we do. So at any point in time, as is the case today, I'll be booking a super yacht in the Greek Isles, down to an excursion in Antarctica, Namibia, something in the Caribbean, or even here in my backyard. So we have a multifaceted approach to travel. What we do is we look at our product as a blank sheet of paper. So you won't find us offering something that's off the shelf. You won't find a set departure product. You won't travel with other people unless it's an affinity group that you have bought to us. And as you saw from the big initial photo, wine, gastronomy is something that speaks to me personally. So wherever we can, we like to have a immersive component of that. I think it helps people understand foreign cultures, the food and wine component.
So Darren, may I just ask, how do you compare to what we would have seen the travel agency on the corner or in the town square? What sets you apart?
So we like to think that we have a team here that offers a service level that envelops our customers. And I don't pay lip service to that. We have a very well-educated, highly empathetic, high-functioning team. And I've joked with them, over the last year, what's the best thing that we've done? We've answered the phone. We've had people all over the world with whose travel has blown up and they've wanted it cancelled or postponed. And there's been a lot of hand-holding. There's been a lot of, as I use the word empathy with thought, we've looked after people, and we are not that entity where you're trying to get hold of an airline and you're on hold for an hour and a half. You're trying to get hold of Expedia because you've booked an accommodation and it's taking you 4 or 5 people to try and figure out something. We are all, elite travel experts, and we're picking up the phone and we're a multifaceted solution. Everything soup to nuts.
Thank you.
And our client base, as I say here, they look to us for that. It's a discerning client base. It's well traveled. It's thoughtful. It's based here in the New England / US market, and we have a fun time with them. And apropos my earlier photo, I've been on the road over the last 6+ months. I've traveled to Kenya, Zanzibar, Tanzania, most recently to South Africa last week. And it's been to do what I think is important at the moment. Get out there and see what travel is like out there. What is it like to push product through the system? And then I can come back and give that advice very succinctly so that our clients' travel is above and beyond everything else simple. So to the current backdrop, and I've thought it would be sensible to break it down into 3 components: the past, the present, and the future. The past, it's pretty easy to outline. From a travel perspective, long-haul travel has been eviscerated. If airlines are not flying and borders are obviously closed, people haven't been going anywhere and it hasn't been fun. What we have had is we've seen our, what I call my in my backyard portfolio blossom. So there's been exponential interest in anything that is the continental US. And fun, and luckily we've had some fun with that product, but certainly international travel had come to a screeching halt.
But Darren, is that changing? I think I heard some announcements in the news, some European countries that are going to be welcoming people back soon.
Yeah, it is amazing, Paula. On Friday, France announced that in 2 weeks' time, they're going to be accepting international visitors. That completely took me by surprise. And if that took me by surprise, it came out of left field yesterday or Monday, Italy announcing that they're going to be open in short order. In some 2 to 4 weeks' time, Italy is going to be accepting vaccinated, PCR negative, and people with COVID antibodies into the country, which is, honestly, if you told me we were looking at the end of the summer for that, I would not have been surprised.
Yeah, especially because when the pandemic first started, Italy, it was like all we ever heard was about Italy. And being so locked down. So that is pretty amazing.
It really is. And I think it also goes to address something that will come up a little bit later. So I don't want to advance the discussion too much, but it tells us that what we're hearing in the press and what we're reading is maybe not representative of what's happening in the countries. These guys are not opening without due reason and due course. It means things are looking on the up and up in respective countries. So it's a good way to segue to the present. When is the right time to start booking these countries? Booking travel and traveling are obviously 2 different things. Booking travel, if you're considering long-haul travel anytime over the next 18 months, the time to book it is now. You should advance the travel planning process. I can tell you from the volume of business that we are seeing an exponential demand, the next 18 months, certainly 2022, is going to be a bun fight. The problem has never been demand. The problem has been confidence. As confidence returns with vaccines at scale and obviously countries opening, the dominoes are falling in short order, availability is going to evaporate. As to when you can travel, that's a very personal decision. Obviously, I have not been vaccinated and so I was traveling to countries over the last 6 months when vaccines weren't being available. So I'm a little bit more laissez-faire, should I say. Not irresponsible, I don't like to think, but I don't need a vaccine to travel personally. Some people may. So it's a personal decision. But I can tell you, and we do advise all the time when clients come to us, I can tell you we will be very forthright with you about whether we think a country that is open is viable to travel to. Because there's a difference, right, between being open and then being open and ready for travel. One thing that has come about in the market, and I think engenders confidence for when you do start to book travel, is that there is a lot of flexibility around cancellation and postponement terms and conditions. The market had got to a very rigid situation where you were subject to terms and conditions, and if you cancelled, you were not refunded. Well, now you have a long lead time in which to pay, and it varies by country and it varies by product. But that flexibility, even with airlines, the last bastion of flexibility, even these guys have shown some resolve. Right now, one of the problems, if you can't always get a hold of me or your travel guy, so what reliable information resources are you looking to get a sense of what is out there? Because as Paul and I were discussing earlier on, we're getting a lot of stuff thrown at us. How do we filter it? How do we distill it? And where do we go to? So prior to the presentation, I provided Paula with my resources, and she's going to pop them into the chat box now, and feel free to copy them. And they're a combination of the best dashboards, which are updated on a daily and sometimes intra-daily basis by country around the world. And that gives you an idea of what is required to go to the country, to enter it, what is required when you're in the country, and what is required in some instances to exit those countries. That's a valuable resource. And in addition to that, I've given her some trade periodicals, which I frequent, as well as obviously customer and consumer resources. And I've had a lot of recent experiences. I think a question on many people's minds is, from the moment I leave home, get to the airport, what's the airport experience like? What is customs and immigration and checking in looking like? And I will say to you that particularly now, because of a low volume footprint of people, and a realization among airports, who are businesses as well, and airlines, there is a heightened attention to detail and a heightened attention to service, and these guys have got their act together. I came back to the States, as I mentioned, last week, and I flew into Atlanta. Actually, it was my first port of call, and the customs and immigration people were smiling and polite. It's almost like a VIP meet and greet at the airport. So, it was pretty interesting to see from that perspective.
Can I ask you a quick question? Do you recommend having global, is it global entry, global relay?
Absolutely.
Okay, for those international trips.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a good question. We'll come down to what the future holds here in a second, and things that are being trialed. But the more simplicity you can have when you come to your any choke point, any stress point in your travels, the more you have in terms of technology or no touch ability to traverse, the better off you are. And I think, as I've said here, as we referenced earlier, vaccines are going to be available at scale and countries are going to open. But this is going to be an 18-month period through to the end of 2022, where we will have quantum leaps forward, no doubt. We've seen them. But we're also going to be met with some setbacks. Some we know could be waves, could be countries closing, could be new variants, could be things that we don't know about. So if you feel you can travel in a healthy, responsible, and safe fashion, travel now. COVAC is something I wanted to highlight. I referenced it to Paula in a conversation when we were talking about this presentation. It's a game changer. COVAC is an insurance provider, it's fully indemnified, and it provides one insurance policy, and it is to cover one eventuality only. And that is, if you contract COVID outside of the United States on a long haul trip, you are flown privately back to home base and transferred to your end destination of choice, should it be a hospital if you require medical treatment, or home if you wish to rest and convalesce there. It's not an expensive proposition. It's a great stopgap measure until as and when we have herd immunity, and this is a minor epidemic. So that's something to reference going forward. And as to the future, I'm asked a lot about vaccination passports. Are they going to become a reality? And there are currently 4 major providers globally who are working on standardizing vaccination passports. And this is something that's been in my wheelhouse for a very long time. Being South African, you require a yellow fever certificate to traverse throughout Africa. So I've always had one. I carry it with me. And I think we'll see that with COVID. Vaccination certificates will be required. They won't be necessarily a necessity for travel, but they'll make your travel a lot easier. And in some instances, whether it be countries, Iceland is an example right now, airlines, Qantas is an example, or cruise lines, they'll say no vaccination, no entry. So we'll get that bifurcation in the marketplace. Doesn't mean that you can't travel to myriad destinations with a PCR test, but I suspect it's going to be easier to travel with a vaccination passport. And as Paula, rightly highlighted earlier, something like global entry or one of those providers, Clear, for example, having anything that can assist with no-touch check-in is going to make your life a lot easier. And then, particularly because we've had downtime now, I've served on a lot of think tank platforms, and it's quite remarkable what is being trialed out there. Google, along with Uber, is trialing self-driving cars that are going to provide a service whereby they'll come to your home, you enter the car, from the moment you enter the car to the moment you arrive at the airport, you are de facto in a bubble and you start the check-in process. They can scan you, they can check your bags, and they deliver you right to the gate. So your first experience at the airport is delivery to the gate. So no check-in, no security, nothing. You are pre-cleared and you check in via that self-driving car. It's going to revolutionize check-in. It's been trialed as we speak.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, that's just one thing. You should see some of the things I'm exposed to. It's really remarkable, particularly how airports are redesigning the customer experience from the moment they leave home, not the moment they walk into the airport terminal.
Which is exciting because I feel like that often the airline and travel is like, you feel like you're herded cattle going through an airport.
And I think that mass tourism is regrettably coming back at a point in time. And that's why I come back to, if you can travel, I can't underscore it enough. The experiences I have had over the last while are like retracing travel back variably 25, 50, 75 years with the footprint of people. We'll never get this time back, seeing experiences and having them by default private. So we talked a little bit about what suppliers are doing, but this slide is called protocols and trip design. So what are you going to need to travel, and what is being done to make you comfortable and healthy when you travel? So suppliers, and by these I talk about variably safari lodges, experience providers, hotels, etc. The ones that I've experienced, I don't detail all they do to our customer base. They just trust in my integrity that I've walked that walk and I've experienced all the measures that are in place. And I can tell you, they are global standard, better than anything we've seen here in the States. Airlines too, and airports are acutely aware that if they don't sanitize the experience and they don't make it a seamless and as simple as possible an experience, they're not going to survive, never mind thrive. So, again, I've been on airlines where every seat is a business class seat because there's 3-4 seats. There are more rows than there are people. So it's a good time to get out there. What we're doing is these trips, I go, you go. These trips have engendered a lot of confidence among our customers. And it's an acute vetting process when I'm on the road. I really look under the covers to determine what measures are in place across the spectrum. And then, as you'll see from the dashboard that I've passed on through Paula, we monitor recovery trajectory. So every week, we've got a list of countries that are open And then of those countries that are open and accepting US customers, which ones would we honestly recommend you travel to? Because as I said earlier on, where you can travel to and where we're comfortable sending you to, they're different universes. And up until the opening of Italy and France, there were 56 countries globally where US citizens could travel to. And quite honestly, unless places like Albania on your hit list, there's probably only 24 or 25 that were really worthwhile traveling to. And we're continuing that process of negotiating more flexible terms and conditions so that nobody feels as though they've built up the confidence to travel, put measures in place, and then suddenly are hung financially from an inflexible terms and conditions perspective. We're not always successful, but we're constantly negotiating with suppliers. Information resources we talked about, the reassurance that we hopefully bring to bear, we talked about that. But this is the big one. How do you prepare for your trip? Well, you know what the good news is? Not much more differently than you did before. As long as you have one key difference in place, and that's a knowledge base around pre-departure testing requirements, pre-arrival testing requirements, any protocols you need to observe in the particular country that you're in, no-go areas, for example, and equally as importantly, exiting the source market that you have traveled to and the requirement to get back to the States. That sounds like a lot, but it's not. So my previous trip to South Africa, all I required was, and this is almost standard for every country you travel to at the moment, you need a negative PCR test within 3 days of arrival in your destination country. And to return to the US, you need an antigen test. You can get a 24-hour turnaround PCR test here, easy to leave the States. And in South Africa, as I did, you go to the airport and in 15 minutes, costs you $15, they give you a rapid antigen test result.
So it's becoming very accessible through the airports to get it, because I'm thinking we traveled last fall and buying our PCR tests, we bought them ahead of time. We, had to FedEx them, and we spent like $225 a piece for these in order to travel. So it's nice to know that the prices come down too.
Yeah, the price is coming down. Now, I'm not going to overstate the reduction in prices in the States. It is one of the more expensive markets.
Yeah.
But generally now between sort of $100 and $150, you can get a PCR test should you require that prior to travel. And in any destination market I've been to, and granted it's been Africa, I've never paid more than $80 for a PCR test and $15 for an antigen test.
Okay. I did hear last week that CVS, Walgreens will be having one that you can buy off the shelf.
Yeah, I heard that too. But again, that's in the realm of, certain PCR tests are accepted, others aren't. They have to be ones that are attested by a licensed physician. So that PCR test you're talking about, helpful to have at home if you want to self-test and be comfortable, but might not. I don't know about this one in particular, but it might not be accepted for travel.
But that's a great distinction to make, because I would not have thought that on my own.
Yeah. And that's why, as I said, those pre-departure requirements we'd like to think we're very much on top of. And then pre-arrival in every source market, and this is us coming back to your question of how do we distinguish ourselves, we have a ground handler or a land partner in every destination or source market around the world that we do business with, and they're an extension of our platform. So we plot you onto their platform. When they're there, they envelop you. They've got a 24/7 number. And so your pre-arrival and then your return arrangements are handled through them. So we talked about this window of travel. Hopefully you're all jacked up now. You've got an idea of, you can travel. It's okay out there. It's simpler than you thought, hopefully. And I call it a window. I honestly do, because we could have these times when the window suddenly closed. Then you look back and think to yourself, man, I didn't take advantage of it. And there could be uncertain when I get that opportunity again. And what I have seen, and I can't underscore this, we've just come off our Q1. This Q1 has not been our busiest 3 months in a year or two. It's not been our busiest, Q1. It's been our busiest quarter ever. That's the kind of demand that we're seeing. We are really stretched. And it's for a number of reasons. It's for all of these trends that we're seeing here. I saw it. I was not in the travel business. This is a retirement sort of project for me, but I was in finance for 20 odd years, and I was in New York when September the 11th happened. And I call it almost the September the 11th effect. After the acute emotion of that tragedy started to dissipate, people looked around and said, life is fleeting and we need to elevate these bucket list trips. We were always we'll do it, we'll get to it, we'll do it. Well, now it's coming front and center, and that time to reconnect with family, friends, loved ones, whatever it is, particularly in remote areas, we're seeing that now. Guys are like, you know what, I had this plan, Darren, we're doing it now. So coming back to when are you ready? When is it right to start booking? It's right to start booking now, if you're serious about it. And the demand is naturally, as you can imagine, for nature, freshness, wellness, and that is generally, the safari product is doing well because it gives you that seclusion. And a lot of sole use properties, particularly for what we talk about here, multi-gen and skip-gen. Multi-gen obviously being a larger family, the grandparents want to take everyone away. Or skip-gen, which is the grandparents saying, we want to spend time with the grandchildren, not another material gift, but we'd like to take them away. And that's becoming an increasingly popular market, as is the nature of travel. Before, for a long haul trip, we would be getting demand now for 18 to 24 months out in some instances, and you had to book that. Now it's a question of, Darren, you've just come back from Africa, love that you're confident about it, can I go 2 weeks time? The answer is yes. We've got live availability on our desktops and constructed trips pretty swiftly. Workations, I don't want to overstate. We've done a little bit of that business, and I'm told it's a big trend, but I can't speak to it. Obviously, with digital nomads nowadays and cell and internet service being ubiquitous, it's clearly a market. But pod travel is big. We structured a lot of vaccinated friends, or rather, friends who've been in a bubble away together. Then I thought I'd talk a little bit about, just to wrap up here, some inspirations. We talked about what is open. We'll hear a few sights and sounds of what is open and what you might look to experience there. And this is filtered also in part by me, because we as a company always try to avoid mainstream. We avoid any form of race to the bottom, mass tourism sites like the plague. And we also like to have an element of sustainable travel, regenerative travel, as you'll see from some of our safari products in a second, whenever we structure trips. Are closer to home, and generally this has been the Caribbean most recently and has been a very popular market. But long haul, what is open? Almost all of Africa, and doing a much better job than you would anticipate, and maybe that the press is reporting. The Indian Ocean islands, the Maldives, Zanzibar, and Seychelles are open. Europe, there are select countries. Currently, Croatia is open. Greece is open. Montenegro is open. But I think hot on the heels of the announcement from France and Italy, we're set to see Spain and Portugal. So we'll see some of the heavyweights open over the next month. But currently, it's really Croatia that I think is worthwhile traveling to. And then we talked about, I've filtered this further as to there's open and advisable. So obviously, as you see from my cursor here, we're going to talk about the African continent. We'll talk a little bit about Morocco. It's open. They're doing a good job, comfortable structuring travel there. We've got someone departing there next week. East Africa, which is Kenya and Tanzania, and to a lesser degree, Rwanda and Uganda, open, doing well. Incredibly low volume footprint of people. And if you can or wish to travel in the short term, approachable pricing. And then Southern Africa, we'll look a little bit at Namibia, Botswana, South Africa. All of these markets are open. And these are the guys that you'll see, obviously. This was taken by me just a short while ago on the continent. And, they bring along their friends. I always like to say, you see one, you see more of them. And then I talked a little bit about Rwanda and Uganda. In Guerrilla Trekking, I'm in a pretty privileged position, the seat that I sit in when it comes to travel. I've had some very emotive experiences. This is top 3. If you get the opportunity to Guerrilla Trek, it will leave an indelible mark on you. And right now, Guerrilla Trekking you can do with an almost zero human footprint. And if anybody has tried to do it before, anybody has done it, they'll know that there are very, very few guerrilla permits issued. And so you can wait for a very long time to get it. Now you can trek with the guide, maybe one or two other people, and you'll have just a world-class experience.
I'm not sure I'm that ambitious yet.
You know, they are more interested in you, Paula, than you are in them.
Okay.
Cape Town, which is where I just flew in from last week, just honestly doing a remarkable job. And right now, a dearth of tourism. I called it the piranha effect when I was down there. People were so happy, and they've been so happy to see our American guests. They're just like, gimme, gimme, gimme. It's the piranha effect, but in a good way. How can we make this experience all about you? Overjoyed to see people. And this is what I talked about, sustainable and sort of give back regenerative tourism. We like to direct our tourism dollars. And those tourism dollars, by the way, there's a direct link between tourism dollars and wildlife conservation and social upliftment. If you play your cards right and you're directed effectively in the entirety of the African continent. And this is obviously rhino conservation, which is closest to my heart, that I did a couple of times back when I was last there. Elephant conservation too, and you see a lot of these guys. They've actually done pretty well, funny enough, throughout COVID. And we talked about family and multi-gen and skip generational travel, sole use properties in the African bushveld. Look no further. I mean, I think it's singly the best product if you're looking to get away with the family, with the extended family. And then it's not all, about wildlife. If you do go to Africa, if you're looking for seclusion, this is Namibia. I'm a patriotic South African, and I'll deny I've said this, but it's probably my favorite country in Africa. Morocco too. We talked a little bit about Morocco, some fascinating opportunities to see at the moment. And then, the Indian Ocean islands, they speak for themselves. But if you want to be off the grid, you want to a little flame of romance, also a spectacular place to be. And we talked about Montenegro. It's open, doing a tremendous job, tiny population, international flights in and out, medieval history, just gorgeous coastline, pairs very well with Croatia. And then I get a lot of questions about Latin America. And Latin America, I'm most worried about Asia at the moment, but Latin America, I'm worried about second. Places like Colombia, Brazil have not done a great job, but paradoxically, countries like Chile have. So Chile is a shining light. Starting to structure trips down there towards the end of the year. And obviously this is what you get. It's the Latin American equivalent of Africa, right? Patagonia is deep south, tiny human footprint, remote, desolate, and picturesque beauty. And then finally, for those who want to get out of the shores of the States, we've got some tremendous product, sole use fillers here, like in Anguilla that we're doing in the Caribbean and the DR. And that's been something that's been a bit of a respite for the American market, getting into the Caribbean and being able to get in and out very easily. And you're very close to home base should you have any discomfort. Right. So I can't help but leave you with this final statement, putting my patriotic South African hat on when it comes to travel. And no doubt I'm looking at some faces, and all of you are a little bit like this at the moment, nice and tired, ready for a Cinco de Mayo refresher. So I'm happy, leaving it at that. I'm happy to answer questions. So, over to you, Paula.
So thank you, Darren. I think you do call those photos like eye candy. I mean, they just inspire me and they make me want to travel. And actually, in full disclosure, Bill and I are planning a trip with Darren to go to on a safari, and we're taking advantage of that window of time to travel, and quite excited about it, and feel very good about the process. I want to open it up. Do people have questions? You can feel free to unmute yourself and just ask the question straight out. Bill, I don't think we've had any in the chat yet. Oh, there we do. Can you give us some examples of US trips that you like, Darren?
Absolutely. Normally in a situation like this, I would I hate to answer a question with a question, but it depends on, what type of trip you're looking for. Is it out there beach? But there are a few things that spring to mind. We've unearthed some tremendous US product, and quite honestly, in our zip code up and down the Atlantic seaboard, there are 3 entities that stand out. Up north, there is Twin Farms in Vermont, which I think is just doing a stellar job. It's a world-class entity, great gastronomy, wonderful exposure to local art, outdoors activities, skiing. So getting a lot of good feedback from that. Then there is the Inn at Perry Cabin, which is down on Chesapeake Bay, just outside of DC. Ideal long weekender, if you're in any one of the major metropolitan areas here on the East Coast. Fantastic if you want to take a Hinckley out on Chesapeake Bay, or just cycle across the oldest, functioning ferry in the country. These little kind of almost long lost villages. And Inn at Perry Cabin does a great job. So if you're a lover of tennis, golf, and all those pursuits, and you can get into DC in 45 minutes across the bridge, to Annapolis to explore the Naval Academy. So there's a lot of variety to do down there. So really like that. There's Blackberry Farm, of course, which probably people have read about, and newly created Blackberry Mountain, its sister property, which is just glorious. You're at the foothill of the Smokies. Can't say enough about that. Again, tremendous farm to table type culinary experiences, wonderful wine cellar, learn to fly fish. And then there is, out Midwest, we've continued to partner with a couple of properties which I love. One of them being Paws Up, which is a national park equivalent, except it's private, 35,000 acres all the way along the Blackfoot River. So if you're a fisherman or you like any manner of outdoor pursuits year round, it's tremendous. And it's got a new little property called the Green O, which are these Scandinavian style tree houses. Really cutting edge design and my kind of contemporary architecture. So, or you can do the traditional camping, sort of fly camping along the river front. And then finally, I could ramble on, but finally another one that springs to mind is, you are probably familiar with Ted Turner, the media mogul. Little known fact about him is that he is the 2nd largest private landowner in the country. And he's given over every single acre in sort of southern New Mexico, southern Colorado and northern New Mexico to wildlife conservation. Vast herds of bison, all manner of other wildlife, including bear. So his property under Ted Turner Reserves, his own home is now available, etc. So that's something to really consider if you're looking for that.
Darren, we get a question on the Azores.
Yeah,
great. Is it too soon to travel there?
Well, it's Portuguese sovereign territory, Bill. So the Azores is not yet open, but as soon as it is, whoever asked that question, that's such an astute question, because there's a direct flight. It's a 4.5 hour flight from either Boston or New York.
Sorry, Darren, to cut in. They were looking for June.
If firstly, it's a great month to go. If Portugal announces that it's going to be open, yes, but we have to wait for that announcement. And as I said earlier, it's going to be like hot on the heels of Italy and France. So I would venture to say, yes, you'll be able to.
I know the Azores has been on my list for a while. My brother got married there a year and a half ago, and I would love to get there myself.
Yeah, it's a really, really smart, thinking person's destination. It's inexpensive on a relative basis. A huge amount of activity, great marine activities as well. It's a very smart choice.
And we have a question on train travel, particularly in Scotland, but I would imagine the question would also go out to Europe as well.
Yeah, as to whether it's open or whether there are products worthwhile.
The question is, can you touch upon train travel interested in Scotland?
Yeah,
in the products too.
Yeah, so the Flying Scotsman is kind of the benchmark and always has been in Scotland, and it is a world-class product. what many people do and what we've structured before is you fly into London, and rather fly up to Edinburgh or Glasgow, whatever your departure point is for the Scotsman, you take the overnight sleeper train from London. So you kind of begin your train journey, train luxury light, spend a night or two in one of the southern cities, and then head up. Highly recommended. You get into the Highlands, you get to see all things Scotland. So big fan of Scottish rail travel. It's done right, very proper service. As for the rest of Europe, the Belmont trains, the old Orient Express, that product is still intact for the most part. They have reduced the number of departures, but they've expanded the itineraries. So good thing, bad thing. And again, I'm a fan of those products. I've got no doubt that them being Belmont, that the protocols for you to get on the train and whether you get off the train and back on the train again, I think are going to be at the highest order. I don't know what they are because that product hasn't started up, but I would venture to say you could probably travel confidently from a train perspective.
Darren, I have some questions for you regarding the impact of COVID just in general on the different products that you offer. Have you found that you've had to make some alternative switches in restaurants or accommodations, or even, a different safari that someone might want to go on to? I'm just, I see some of the restaurants around here that have sort of gone out of business, and in other parts of the United States. And I'm just wondering how the impact has affected your business and how you do things.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I'll tell you, the answer that you might expect is that the landscape has been eviscerated, and we don't see safari lodges that were iconic still open, or safari providers, or restaurants have gone by the wayside. And I have been staggered at how they've held in there.
Good.
So, and maybe I like to think that the portfolio of counterparts that we've chosen have had that fiscal backbone, and that restaurants have just had such longevity that they've been able to adapt, whether it be, as we've seen here, takeout or catering or home catering, whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's not, the landscape has held, and I'm happy to see that, I must say.
And then I had a question on vaccines, because you were talking about taking tests. If you've been fully vaccinated, do you have to take tests coming in and out?
You do.
You do, okay.
You do, yeah, and it's for a couple of reasons. Number one is because obviously being vaccinated is, depending on which vaccine you've got, variably 90, 93, 97% efficacious. Mm-hmm. So you could still have it. And secondly, if you are entering a country that does not yet have herd immunity, or it's even just close to herd immunity, and you have contracted COVID, but obviously cannot be impacted by it, you can still carry it into the country. Right. So countries, even of their own volition, they require one of two things: you to have taken a rapid antigen test 4 hours before boarding your flight in that tiny window, and or they administer one when you arrive. And some countries, like Rwanda, administer a PCR test. You sort of sleep it off, so to speak. All flights arrive late evening. They administer it at the airport. By the time you wake up, they have the result to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
In the same vein, I have a question. If what happens if you test positive coming back into the United States? What are your options then? What do you do? Where do you go to quarantine or whatever?
So you're not tested upon arrival in the States. You're yeah. So then if you test positive, you will not be allowed to fly. Right. Yeah. So then if you haven't had that, I referenced, I don't know if you recall COVAC insurance earlier on, that you haven't, if you don't have that at your disposal, then at the cost of other travel insurance that you hopefully would have purchased, there is a per diem that allows for you to be quarantined and or under medical care, or for your own expense, you have medical care and quarantine. So it's not the most palatable, course. People simply they have a visceral reaction when they think, oh my word, I'm going to be in a remote area in Africa, for example, and I could contract COVID. There's no way around that unless you've obviously got COVAC insurance, or unless you've been in an environment where you've considered to have been in a bubble. But I will tell you that that then again comes down to the quality of provider. Firstly, the designer that's put your trip together, and the quality of providers that they have offered on the ground. It's imperative that those guys have been vetted. You'll find that in almost all countries that are administering vaccines, and it's certainly the case in Africa. Right. Frontline workers are considered tourism professionals. So drivers, guides, people working in hotels, they are the front line.
Do you recommend taking the COVAC insurance in addition to regular travel insurance? Or does that COVAC cover everything as well as evacuation and such?
COVAC does cover your evacuation because it's just it's a one eventuality, and it's a one policy coverage, but it does not cover trip interruption, trip cancellation. So for example, let's say you do contract COVID and you've bought COVAC and you're halfway through your trip and you call the hotline and they pop you in a private jet and they fly you back to the States, but you've missed a week of safari. COVAC insurance is not covering you for that trip interruption, but that trip interruption may be covered under
another policy.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
No other questions right now coming through on the chat line.
Don't tell me I've done a good enough job. I mean, it's impossible.
No, I'm sure there'll be a question.
Darren, what are some of your favorite places? I know you've said Africa, but what are some places that you just love?
Yeah, so I am the, big fan of New Zealand. I used to live there for almost 2 years. It's such an egalitarian population, such a homogeneous society. They welcome tourism. They've got the tourism model nailed. There's such variety, and there's what I call a Kiwiness about it. Everything works, everybody's polite, and this natural beauty just kind of washes over you. So New Zealand is probably one of my top picks, and was our most aggressively growing destination before the world turned on its axis. And I'm a big fan, funny enough, of Madagascar. If you're an intrepid traveler and you want something that is very unique and you want something off the beaten path, Madagascar offers that. There is fauna and flora that exists in Madagascar that exists nowhere else in the world. It's the world's 4th largest island. There's an incredible variety of things to do. It's an ex-French colony, so believe it or not, the food is very, very good. And
good for you too.
Yeah. So, I like that. And then, there are a couple of small destinations in Latin America that I'm a big fan of. Uruguay is maybe not necessarily as a standalone country, or possibly, but definitely as an addendum to a trip to either Chile or Argentina. It's much overlooked, but it's a very forward-looking society. First country in the world to ever legalize marijuana, for example. And just great beaches, again, great gastronomy, great wines. So I'm going. It's a country that over delivers.
Fascinating. Places I wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah.
Who else has got a question? There's got to be something there.
Darren, I have a question. I might be just naive, but what is pod travel? Do you just explain that a little?
So the first big one that we did was back in January, and Michael, one of our team, one of our young sales guys, he had a group of friends in Boston that decided some time into COVID, 1, 2, 3 months, that they were, they wanted to socialize, but they didn't want to step outside of a pod. So there were 10 or 15, I don't know, variably 8 or 10 couples that sort of did most things together, and they minimized their exposure to everything else. They worked remotely, but these are the people they hang out with. And they did it for an extended period of time, and lo and behold, determined, no one was bringing a communicable disease of any form into their little pod, and they could lead life that way. So they wanted to travel as that pod, and they wanted to take sole use of a villa. So it's an affinity group of friends or family that were always deemed to be healthy and managed to be together and remain together and wanted to travel together.
Thank you.
Interesting.
You hear that a lot with people with school-age kids. My pod of friends. That's where I first heard the term.
Yeah.
Anyone else have a question? This has been fascinating.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, I'm actually mad at Darren because I didn't know all this stuff before we started talking about safari. Now I want to go to Madagascar and everywhere else. So.
I predict, Bill, that when you go to Africa, if I had $10 for everybody who said to me, please structure this trip, get it done right, because this will be one and done. I won't be going back to Africa. And lo and behold, not long after they get back, I get the call, well, I might want to go back. And where else do you recommend? Once that bug bites, it gets in here. And, the continent is so diverse. 3.5 times the size of the States, So you can imagine Morocco is different to Egypt, as Egypt is to Mozambique, as to Rwanda. It's glorious.
It's amazing.
Besides booking travel, are you also a trip leader for some of these groups?
I have been. When I first started the company, I did guide trips, and now we've come and then I stopped doing it, and now we've come full circle, and I have guided 2 trips, one to Kenya, to Tanzania. I'm about to guide one to Kenya, and we just today actually put the finishing touches to what we call our signature series of trips, and there are going to be 5 that we're going to launch, most of which I'm going to be guiding. So yes, I'm going to start guiding them again, and it's dictated by the market, because it's a case of there's a confidence around your travel guy not being 7 hours away. If something goes wrong, he's 7 feet away. So there's that aspect to it. So, and I'm quite looking forward to getting on the road again for doing that.
That'll be fun. Any final questions for Darren?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it seems that you primarily specialize in safaris and such, but do you book other parts of the world? Do you book in Europe and places like that? And if so, can you provide like, say, private tours in wherever your destination is, private transportation, that sort of thing?
Yeah, very much so. In fact, I would venture to say at the moment, I haven't looked at the pie chart for a little bit, but Africa might, for the first time, be close to being in the minority of our business. It's about 50-50, Africa and non-Africa. So we've got very much a global footprint. And I've traveled to all 7 continents. I'm very comfortable, as are our staff, in myriad destinations around the world. And again, it's built from the grassroots up. It's not us, researching something from afar and trying to travel and leisure or Condé Nast a product. It is literally tangible knowledge. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to develop relationships with exactly what you were referencing: private experiences, private guides, the right kind of touring, insiders' experiences in all those source markets. And we have a forensic attention to detail when it comes to that. We are very, very particular. I always say to my team, one of our mantras is, this is a detail-oriented business.
Aaron, a couple of years ago, I remember you were really starting to research into Armenia.
Yeah.
I'm just curious how that panned out.
Bill, it's a great memory. It panned out extremely well. I went to Armenia and Georgia because they were set to be the new vanguard of wine tourism on the one hand. Georgian cuisine was hugely talked about on the other. And, religious tourism it's not by any means run its course in Israel, but it's a known quantity. But religious tourism in Georgia and Armenia is absolutely fascinating. And if you looked at those countries, you know, they're a crossroads. They're at the sort of Europe, Asia nexus, and everybody had been through there. So there's a real melting pot. So anyway, I went across and I spent a few weeks in both countries, and I kind of looked under the covers. Armenia was absolutely fascinating. And I came back and I, you know, couldn't wait to start structuring trips there. And then lo and behold, you know, we've seen what's happened. They've had the war with Azerbaijan over disputed territory, and now it's a sort of no-go zone for a while. Georgia was different. I was not that impressed by Georgia. I wanted to love it, but I came back not liking it. And in a nutshell, and this is not being disparaging whatsoever about the country, but it became apparent to me when I was there that when the USSR broke up, this is an interesting historical reference point, the Soviet socialist republics all had their own different personalities. So Armenia was called the Nerd Republic. They had all the chess masters and the nuclear scientists. The Georgians, they were a republic of thugs. So all these hard guys come from there, and that's the way, that's the front that you see. And I'm sure if you spent more than I did, instead of a few weeks, a few months there, it might be different, but very hard facade, which for me wasn't, it was in stark contrast to what I experienced in Armenia. So I loved Armenia. There is a tourism product in Georgia, but Armenia is a little gem.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can say personally, I mean, Darren spent a lot of time on the phone with Bill and I, like trying to figure out who we are as people and what makes us tick, so that, you know, could really craft the trip around us, not around someone else and their experiences. So I'll let you know how it plays out.
We haven't lost anyone yet, don't worry.
I'm very confident. Anything as we wrap up?
Me? You're asking me?
Anybody here? Yeah.
Oh, I thought you said Ginny.
Oh, no, that's okay. Well, I want to thank you all for taking time on your Cinco de Mayo to come hear about, we actually, the one place we didn't talk about was Mexico, but we talked about most of the rest of the world. So I hope that this has given you some confidence and some inspiration to think forward your next 18 months. And if you can do it, you know, grab that trip, make it happen. Because I think we all need something to look forward to right now as we come out of this. And we hope that tonight has provided you with that. Darren, thank you for giving up your Wednesday night to be with us.
Thank you.
We're so grateful. And we will put this out to folks who aren't able to be here tonight so that they too can learn about the adventures of travel.
Yeah. Thank you. It was really very, very informative. Thank you very much.
So much. Thank you, Paula and Bill.
Thank you.
Paula,
Thank you.
honored to
Hello,
chat
Bill.
to you.